one thing I think you can say about the Book of Enoch is that it does faithfully capture the way that many people thought through these things and how they, in that time and place, interpreted Genesis 6, for example. I think it gives good evidence that there was at least a strong sort of background understanding of the events of Genesis 6 as more of the spiritual being hypothesis than the Seth hypothesis. And so I think about the Book of Enoch similarly to the way that I would think of other myths that capture essentially garbled elements of the true history of the world. So you think about all of the flood narratives that show up in ancient cultures. We were just discussing the Sumerian kings list. And so I put it in that category. And the reason I would put certain elements of it even a little bit higher in that category of, again, not being canon, but also helping us understand the way that ancient peoples retold and garbled the true history of the biblical narrative of the world. But then when you start looking at some of the New Testament references to these things, like in Jude and Peter, in some certain aspects of the Enochian text, those elements then I think become a little bit more where you can say, okay, this passage from it might actually more closely resemble an actually correct tradition about what took place. And I think about it like almost every false cult or false writing will have elements of it that are actually correct. It's not all wrong. Like that's very rarely, because it's very difficult to get it all wrong and have an even intelligent story at that point, because God is this arch playwright storyteller telling the story of history. So I think we can treat it as, like you said, very carefully and making sure that we're staying within the moorings of biblical safety. But also, I would put it in that category of, I have no fear of reading the ancient Sumerian king list and ancient Egyptology and trying to understand how this fits into the world, where they got it wrong, what was correct. I know Ben probably has something he would add to that too.
Yeah, the kind of the rule of thumb that I've given myself and shared with other people is that you're free to use those texts. You're especially free to use those texts insofar as the New Testament authors use those texts. So you look at Peter and Jude in the scope that they zeroed in on in the Book of Enoch. I'm like, even if the details that they don't transcribe are different, the essence of what they're saying is true. It has to be. Like the essence is infallible with the scope that they give. And then I would agree with you that apart from that, it's probably presumptuous to think that everything else is dead wrong, because it's very hard to get everything wrong. And then I would also say that, as a word of caution, with any apocryphal work, but especially with Enoch, because it's referenced in the New Testament multiple times, you actually do have to have a little bit of extra guard, because it'd be really easy for you to go too far and think that since it's referenced once, therefore you can use it really freely and to try to connect dots.
Any other part.
And you can't do that and then be overly dogmatic. You can do that and try to connect dots. I think that you're free, so long as it doesn't contradict what's clearly taught in Scripture. But you can't do that in a way that binds conscience and is overly dogmatic. So in one sense, it frees you, and in another sense, it does kind of constrict your ability to think in too rigid of terms. But yeah, within the scope that Peter and Jude were writing, like, of course, Enoch is dead on. It's right. Otherwise, they wouldn't have referenced it.